Welcome to the 5-7 podcast. I'm your host, Pri, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Mike Salinas.
Yes, I am back, ladies and gentlemen.
And today we're also joined, we have another guest who goes by Party Marty. How you doing, Martin?
Doing real good, man. Thanks.
We're going to go over the Errol Spence Jr. and versus Mikey Garcia fight that's happening this weekend. So we've got Party Marty in here to give us some boxing analysis. He's located, where are you located at?
South Loop, Chicago.
Do you have any, why don't you go over some of your boxing experience?
In terms of actual fighting, or in terms of like how long I've been interested in the fight game?
Yeah, I mean, no, not like you're, fighting drunk taxi cab drivers from Tijuana, but just fights in general.
Yeah, or fighting me in a couple bars.
Yeah, or fighting me in hotel lobbies.
I had a brief amateur career. I was got interested in the fight game as a young teenager, and the fight that got me interested in the fight game was the first Roberto Duran Sugar Ray Leonard fight that took place in Montreal. And, from that point forward, I was sold on the fight game.
He lost that fight, didn't he, Sugar Ray Leonard?
I remember growing up as a kid, he lost that fight. And, of course, the infamous rematch, which most people know as the No Mas fight from Roberto Duran. From that point forward, I took a strong interest in the fight game. And eventually my goal was to actually fight professional at one point, but I ended up into the amateurs and fighting. And ironically, tonight's the night when I had my last, not my last, but I fought in the 2001 Chicago Golden Glove. And so that was kind of a fun period of my life. And so it was pretty interesting, and fighting has done a lot for me in terms of being physically active in it, and it's actually part of my current workout. In fact, it's always been a part of my workout. Very cardiovascular. It's more than what people think. It's not just simply swinging your arms. You move most parts of your body that you don't even know. There's a lot of things that you can learn from the sport of boxing. It's not simply hitting. It's actually the art of to hit and not be hit in return. And so, you can actually, like with most other things in life, you can actually learn from those and draw out from the boxing world into life itself, as however you see fit to see that. But yeah, I've had a strong interest in boxing for quite some time now.
So when you've been fighting, obviously watching is one thing. What made you actually want to get into it?
A challenge. To see that, it's unlike, baseball, basketball, football, which, obviously those are the sports that I also was interested in growing up. But those are team sports, and so when you play those sports, you're dependent on your other players that are on your team. And in boxing, it's different. It's just you. That's it.
Yeah.
You step into the ring, and of course, you get advice from the cornerman. But once that bell rings, it's just you and the other guy, and you live and die by that. There's something about attrition and getting prepared for a fight, to working out, and to being in your best physical shape, and the challenge of being in there with someone else. I look at it as an art, and that might be for some hard, for some to kind of relate to, but I really believe you're born a fighter. You got to want to step into that and be willing to take and to show the skills that you have. And it was just something that I always wanted to do, and to be honest with you, I miss it now.
Party Marty, I've got to totally agree with you. There's nothing worse about team sports than having to deal with teammates. I don't want to pass the ball. I don't want to give anybody high fives. I would rather just rely on myself and myself alone because I know I can get the damn job done. I love
it. It all falls apart. It falls apart on top of you.
It falls apart on the coaching and whoever coached me.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd be the coach too.
It would be the trainer's fault, not mine.
So watching boxing, it's there's a lot of guys who watch boxing, and you could tell that they've been watching it, for years and years and years, which you have. What would you say? Obviously boxing is very different nowadays. How would you say it's changed over the past 20 years?
Well, the main difference is, I think, is that boxing now today is more of a business. It's not. It's more of a business in terms of for the fighters, whereas probably 30 years ago, boxing was a business, but it was more so a business on the promoter's end.
Yeah, I would say it seems like the guys, like the fighters, have a lot more control over, what they're doing, and like essentially like where the money's going, kind of taking some of the money out of the promoter's hands. Would you agree?
I agree. And that's not such a bad thing. I think it's a good thing that fighters have more control. But the only downside of that is that you don't have the big stake fights that you had. I'll say this, like I said, even 20 years ago. You look at, for example, Oscar de la Hoya. Most people, you either loved Oscar de la Hoya or you hated him. But say what you will about Oscar de la Hoya, but he fought everyone. He fought fighters in his prime. Tito Trinidad, Sugar Shane Mosley, Ike Quartet. He was unifying titles against top-ranked, high-skilled fighters, other champions. And you can't say that really about today's fighters. And I don't know if it's because of a lack of talent in the pool, but you just don't see the fighters fighting each other as much as, they were like, 20, 30 years ago. I mentioned, I want to mention, Tommy Hearns, Wilfred Benitez, Sugar Ray Leonard, all those guys fought each other. Even Pepino Cuevas, and that was, who was also in that same welterweight lot with Wilfred Benitez and Sugar Ray Leonard and Burl Duran. Those guys all fought each other. And you see like fighters today. Look, you had Sean Porter, you had Errol Spence in the current welterweight division, and you have Kell Brook, and you have now the new guy who's he moved up from junior welterweight, Terrence Crawford. And so the whole idea, from what I'm hearing, why Errol Spence elected to fight Mikey Garcia is because he couldn't secure a fight with the other fighters, the other top welterweights in the division. And I could possibly see that because fighters are looking for longevity now. They're looking for longevity, but they're balancing that with, low risk and money. And whereas fighters had, I would say maybe about 30 years ago, had a little bit less control, and they were more so willing to take chances and willing to test their skills. And, and I think that, like, once again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because fighters need to be in control of their careers at least at some point. I mean, because there's, boxing is unlike, some other sports. I mean, there's no pension in boxing, and a lot of fighters come from, hard life backgrounds, and so they're not the most educated people out there, to know what to do with their money. And you hear stories of fighters getting swindled by their managers running off with the money. And so, I think it's a good thing that fighters have some control, but the drawback to that is that they're just going to be willing to take less risk. And I think that's what's missing in the fight game. But I also think that's what's so great about this weekend on this Saturday with Mikey Garcia and Errol Spence.
Is the fight on ESPN or what's it going to be on pay-per-view?
Fox pay-per-view.
Wow. Do you think that things are going to be moving away from pay-per-views to kind of like the streaming DAZN type of thing?
I think so, and I think what's helped is the demise of HBO boxing, because for years HBO was pretty much known as the number one boxing network on cable. And so if you had HBO cable, then more than likely you were going to buy their pay-per-view fights. But now that pay-per-view or HBO no longer is in that market, a lot of these fighters have decided to go to DAZN and ESPN. And so, Canelo and now Triple G just signed, I believe, this past weekend with DAZN, or known as DAZN. And Terence Crawford is with ESPN. The two of the top three heavyweights are with ESPN now as well, Deontay Wilder and Fury. As for me, I'm kind of like, waiting out to see where the chips fall before I make a commitment to any of them. Because if you subscribe to one, okay, then that means I don't want to have 4 subscriptions to see fights. And so I'm kind of like waiting it out to see where everyone ends up and signing in. I may end up with the one who has the most fighters under their stable.
So I want to touch on something. You just going back to a couple of things you were talking about, how boxing isn't quite the same, and I agree. I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. Like, I feel like it used to be a sport, now it's turned into more of an event. And do you think that has anything to do with maybe Floyd Mayweather? And do you think maybe he's ruined boxing?
That's an interesting question. It certainly seems to have started with Floyd. I want to say this up front. I think Floyd Mayweather is a great fighter. I don't think he's the greatest of all time, as some people think he is, but I think he's a great fighter, probably the greatest defensive fighter that I've ever seen. I often tell people, I think Floyd's a great fighter, but I think he's even a greater businessman. He orchestrated, himself into maneuvering into fights, waiting until most of the fights or his fighters were either close to the father time, or fighters that were, too small for him. And I can give countless examples of that. But and once again, I think it was because it was a business, and Floyd wasn't really interested in taking challenges. He was more interested in making a name for himself. And in the reality TV era that we live in, it was quite easy to do. I mean, he, people will say, well, Floyd fought, he fought, Sugar Shane Mosley, he fought Oscar De La Hoya. Okay, first of all, Sugar Shane Mosley was 39 years old when he fought him.
And he had a hot girlfriend, so that kind of made him weaken the knees, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Oscar De La Hoya, I mean, most people would say that was a shell of De La Hoya that fought Floyd Mayweather. Juan Manuel Marquez was a great lightweight. I don't think Juan Manuel Marquez had never even had a fight at junior welterweight, I don't think. And when he fought Floyd Mayweather, he jumped 2 weight divisions to fight Floyd Mayweather. And of course, Floyd was smart enough. He says, well, this is the guy that most people believe had beat Manny Pacquiao. So sure, I'll fight him. And, so it was Floyd and his team were very, very smart with selling this to the public. These names: Juan Manuel Marquez, Arturo Gatti, Ricky Hatton, Oscar De La Hoya, and of course Sugar Shane Mosley. And of course, it took him 5 years to fight Manny Pacquiao. I mean, that fight should have been made a lot sooner than what it was. And even him and Miguel Cotto. I mean, Miguel Cotto and him were at junior welterweight at the same time. But of course, he chose to fight Miguel Cotto when he was well past his prime. Like I said, I think Floyd's a great businessman. And, am I going to blame Floyd? I'll say this. A lot of fighters tried to be like Floyd after that. And I can't really say I to a certain extent, I can't say I really blame him because fighters for so long were taken advantage of.
Adrian Broner.
Adrian Broner.
He tried to be like Floyd.
Definitely tried to be like Floyd. And I can even tell you stories down from local gyms here in Chicago. Fighters that I knew who they actually they wanted me to manage, and his boxing trainer would come up to me. He says, "Martin," he just goes, "Well, listen, man." He goes, "Come over here, come and work my corner." and he would, his corner man, his trainer would tell me. He says, "Martin," he goes, I'd like for you to manage him, but I'll tell you one thing: the guy's he's a loose handle right now. He's he wants to do his own thing. He won't listen to me, and he says this is the kind of this is the impact that Floyd Mayweather has had on young fighters. He goes, they see that and they want to make money, and as opposed to learning the trade. And that particular fighter that in one particular cases didn't make it past 5 fights, and who I thought was pretty talented. And so I think Floyd was the beginning of the business type, but where the actual blame lays, I don't know. I won't say that, but yeah, I believe it all began around. And so there's not a whole lot of fighters out there that really want to take challenges. I think it's more, well, let me see how much money I can make in the short term, and I'm not really interested in challenging myself. And so that's what separates. I mean, right or wrong. I mean, all I'm saying is that that's what's different between the fighters now than the fighters even like 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think we all kind of agree that maybe he did play a bit of a part in boxing's downfall, because I am a casual boxing watcher, and it seems like boxers are making more money. There's less interest, though. It's kind of like Comcast. Comcast seems to be making more money. I'm not sure why, but there's less interest in people wanting cable television.
Yeah, that's funny. That's a funny analogy. I like when you were talking about De La Hoya, man. I mean, I remember at the time when there was anybody who was anybody, he fought him, and he fought him, whenever he could. And Floyd never did that. Yeah, sure. It was probably a smart, probably smart on his part, but I mean, every guy that he fought, man, was well past their prime. I mean, Cotto had been in, multiple wars. Well,
Cotto got hit with cinder blocks.
Yeah, he did. He did when he fought Margarito. All those dudes who fought Margarito, can blame him for them having CTE. But man, the 90s and like mid 2000s was a fantastic time for boxing, and it seems like now, maybe even like the past 10 years, like it just seems like boxing has really kind of just, I think a lot of people have lost, I don't want to say a lot of people have lost interest, but there's the rise of MMA and the the lack of, say, superstar boxers out there, or say, really memorable fights out that have happened. They haven't happened in the frequency as they did in the 90s and mid 2000s. Do you think MMA has anything to do with that?
I think it does as well. I think I think that because of the lack of quality boxing fights out there, not to say the bad decisions that have been handed down, in the last 5 years, I think has, drawn a sour note to the sport. And I've witnessed some horrendous decisions, and it's terrible. It's terrible for the fans. It's terrible, especially terrible for the fighter. You get the fighter in there, guys just went through 12 rounds of war, and only for some guy to take it away from him with a pencil in his hand. That has a lot to do with it. I think the lack of quality fights and the lack of and the poor decisions that have been handed down. And so, I think that, the question, can boxing rebound? I think when we have fights this coming weekend, as in Errol Spence and Mikey Garcia, I think these are the type of fights that boxing needs. You have Errol Spence, a very good fighter. undefeated welterweight. Seems to be a good above average puncher, a tactician that some people are kind of overlooking, I think, for this fight. I think he's almost as much being the technical fighter that Mikey Garcia is. And I think that's probably going to be the difference between in the fight. But the quality of the fight this weekend, I think Mikey Garcia, here's a guy that's willing to take a challenge and to move up 2 weight classes. He's undefeated. He's had over 40 fights and he's undefeated. And he could have stayed at lightweight to fight Lomachenko. Elected not to wait on Lomachenko, but I think there's some promoter problems there in terms of negotiating, that he elected to take on the biggest challenge in Errol Spence. And I give Errol Spence some credit, also looking for the big fights, looking to fight the other fighters in his division. And I think the only reason that he is fighting Mikey Garcia is because he couldn't secure a fight with Sean Porter or Keith Thurman, who are good welterweights in their own right, but not great, but good welterweights. And so I think that this weekend is going to be a pretty good fight. I think it's going to be a tactical fight initially, but I think that Errol Spence eventually probably will begin to wear down Mikey Garcia toward the second half of the fight. As good a fighter as Mikey Garcia, let's not forget that Mikey Garcia is moving up 2 weight classes to fight Errol Spence at welterweight from 135 to 147, which is huge.
So he's jumping, you said 12 pounds?
Yes.
Roughly?
12 pounds.
And he's giving up some height, giving up some reach. And I believe they're both knockout artists, right? I mean, they're both undefeated with quite a few knockouts.
Yeah, Mikey Garcia's knockouts, most of them have come when in the junior lightweight and featherweight division where he started. So Mikey Garcia started his career in the featherweight division. And so a lot of his knockouts came during that time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, his last 6-7 fights have gone by decision. So he hasn't really had that knockout power at lightweight. And so if he's, let's just say, if his last 6 fights have gone by decision, at lightweight, I don't think it's going to be a knockout. I think it's most likely, if he wins, it's going to be by decision again at welterweight. I don't think he's going to find this punching power that was hiding for the last 3 years. He's going to have to fight the perfect fight, and a lot of that is going to have to do with footwork, because Errol Spence is he's not a one-punch knockout fighter, but he drills the body, man. He's a very good body puncher. And when most people talk about this fight, they just simply say, "Well, Errol Spence, he's the bigger fighter. He's welterweight, he's undefeated." But what the guy does, good foot movement. He maneuvers well. He gets in position well, and he drills to the body. And that's, body punching is kind of a lost art. And I think Mikey Garcia is a very good body puncher as well. I just think that Errol Spence being the best fighter at welterweight, I just think that it's going to be too much for Mikey Garcia in the end.
What do you think Mikey Garcia has going for him going into the fight?
He's a very smart fighter. He's his boxing technique. He's very good at doing everything right in terms of like the basics. He's got good punching. He's got good foot movement. But I think the big question coming in for Mikey Garcia is, what weight is he going to come into the fight? Mikey Garcia has never weighed more than 138 pounds for a fight. And so I often think a fighter makes a mistake when they move up and they've never fought at that weight class. And I'll just use this for example. Mikey Garcia at 135 pounds at lightweight is a fairly quick fighter. And he's got decent footwork and average punching power. what fighters do is they make the mistake when they move up, is that when they move up, they feel that they've got to weigh as much as the other fighter and take their weight to in this case, the welterweight limit at 147 pounds. And what they've done is in doing so, they weigh 147 pounds, or Mikey Garcia in this case, as Errol Spence will be. But no doubt he's taken away with that added weight. He's taken away hand speed. He's taken away probably some punching power. I can't think that he's going to be a heavier puncher at welterweight than he was at lightweight, and that added weight is going to have some kind of effect on his stamina. And so I always say, gain some weight, but why take away what got you there? Why take away the skills that got you to where you were today? And in Mikey Garcia's case, at 135 pounds, I would say, I hope that he doesn't come in any heavier than like 142, 143 pounds. I think he'll be slower. Won't be able to move around. And I think some of that added weight, being that this is his first fight at welterweight, could take some of his stamina away. It takes, a couple of fights for your body to get acclimated to a new weight class.
That's right. For all you beta males out there, if you're not sure what's going on, we're talking to Chicago's very own Teddy Atlas, a.k.a. Party Marty, and we're talking Errol Spence versus Mikey Garcia this weekend. And if you got your rent or your mortgage due this weekend, don't pay it. Instead, put all that money on Errol Spence because he's a minus 400.
Yeah, and I'll add this, is that if you look at, the history of boxing, you look at, and I'm just taking the great fighters, when they've moved up in a weight class for their very first fight, they've usually lost something. Either they've lost, hand speed, punching power, or movement. It usually takes those fighters 2 to 4 fights for their body to get acclimated to where they can start. If they were a if they were a power puncher at their original weight class, it takes them a couple of fights to start for their body to get used to that new weight and to start knocking people out again, or to recover that hand speed that they had so that their body is in better conditioning. I just think that because this is Mikey Garcia's first fight at such a heavier weight, that I don't think that he's going to show us anything different than what he had at lightweight. A common boxing saying that we have in boxing circles, and that is that a great big man always beats a great little man. I think Manny Pacquiao was probably the lone exception to that.
Even though he was on roids. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, well, there were some people that wouldn't argue with you on that.
So what's the next fight after this one? What's the next big one?
We got Canelo and Danny Jacobs, right? May 4th?
Okay. I said big one, man.
Well, come on, guys. I mean, this is in the form of the popular vote. Not probably a good fight, but probably for the ones like me, like a novice, a casual boxing fan. Cinco de Mayo, man. Mexican Independence Day weekend. I'm always tuning into a fight.
Yeah. But it just seems like Canelo gets, just shoved down your throat. Like he's like this ultimate fighter, ultimate entertainer. You can't miss this fight, and he's just not that good. He's just not that good to me, man. He doesn't blow my doors off. When like say for instance, when De La Hoya fought and he got somebody in trouble, he finished him off right away. It was just over. And this guy, it's another 12-round snooze fest. I mean the Triple G fights were good, but other than those, can you name a good fight that he's had?
Usually I drink a lot of beers, so I don't remember them too much afterwards. Yeah, but I feel like he's had some good ones. I mean, besides that clinic that Floyd Mayweather put on him, that was pretty bad.
He was young, though.
Yeah, he was young.
And he was really inexperienced for that fight.
He was 22 or maybe 23 at the time.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, man, I don't know. I couldn't name one, I guess.
I remember when he came onto the scene when he was 19, he was known as this hard-hitting kid, and, the whole deal. And, he's just promoted now as like this huge guy, dude. And I don't buy it, I don't buy it at all.
Yeah.
Marty, what are your thoughts on Canelo?
I like Canelo. But yeah, it's not like he's had, with the exception of the Triple G fights, I really haven't been that excited about Canelo Alvarez. I think Canelo Alvarez is a great fighter, but it's he has that he has good boxing skills. He's very good offensively, and he seems to be getting better defensively still. I don't get really that excited about Canelo Alvarez, and I think the fight with Danny Jacobs is going to be a good fight. I think Jacobs. Some people argue that Danny Jacobs beat Triple G when they fought, and I thought it was a close fight. It could have gone either way, but all close fights go to the champion. There's even talk that the one thing that possibly could lead Floyd out of retirement would be a potential rematch with Canelo Alvarez. That would be an interesting fight. It would be a fair fight. Kind of like the tables would turn, because the first fight, Floyd was the master, and you had baby Alvarez, 22, 23-year-old Canelo Alvarez. The tables would be turned this time. I think it would be Alvarez would be the master, and not saying Floyd would be the baby this time, but age, I think. Even though he's always busy in the gym, Floyd's always in shape. That's one of the things I've always admired about him, that he's always been in shape. But, being in the gym is one thing, and, actually having real fights is another. I actually think that Canelo Alvarez's biggest challenges are probably going to be outside of the middleweight division and maybe in the super middleweight division. I can't see anyone in the junior middleweight challenging him. I would say the Canelo fight would be the next fight of notoriety.
Oh yeah.
But I wouldn't call it necessarily a big fight. But to mention, there are some good boxing prospects out there. I want to mention that on the undercard of the Errol Spence Mikey Garcia fight is a young fighter by the name of David Benavidez, who was the super middleweight champion a couple of years ago. He got caught through a random drug test and tested positive for cocaine. But I tell you, this guy is very talented at super middleweight. And I'll say this, you don't even see many Mexicans fighting above the 160-pound limit, and he's at 168. And so I can see this guy growing out of the super middleweight division and into the light heavyweight division. And I'll tell you what I like about this guy. This guy throws combinations, unlike not that you really see a lot of fighters throw combinations today. Not like this guy. If you'll watch him throw like 6-punch combinations and super middleweight. And so I think that he's got above average defensive skills. I think he's quick hands. Doesn't have one-punch knockout power, but does have sharp punching ability, and his punches do have impact.
And I know what you're thinking. You're booing Canelo. You're booing this Danny Jacobs fight, but I'm going to tell you one reason why you're definitely going to want to watch Canelo versus Danny Jacobs. And there's one reason, and one reason alone, is that you don't trust somebody with 2 first names. And I'll give you a couple case in points. Number 1, Tom Brady. Number 2, Ray Lewis. Number 3, Danny Jacobs. You got to watch this fight. Never trust a man with 2 first names.
Who else has 2 first names?
Chris Paul.
Yeah, he does. Ryan
Howard.
Yeah, Ryan Howard. He was played for the Phillies?
Yes.
He successfully sat on their bench making like $27 million a year for like 3 years or something like that. If you really think about it, that guy's got to be your hero.
That's the great American dream right there.
Yeah, you make it into the MLB, that's all that you got to do. You don't even have to perform after that.
Right, that's a millennial's dream. Make money by sitting on a bench? Sign me up, please.
What about Terrence Crawford? Like, what does he have going on?
I think that he has his next fight scheduled, but I'm not sure who's that next fight is against. Not sure about that, or if he's actually signed anything or not. But I think that the real interesting piece will be the fallout of this fight over the weekend, because I think Mikey Garcia is at a point, I'd say, where he just wants to fight the best fighters, and so I don't see him. Let's say if Mikey Garcia wins the fight and surprises everyone, or surprises most people. I'm sure there's some people out there that expect him to win. I could see Mikey Garcia trying to fight Terence Crawford immediately after that. Now, whether Crawford is going to want to fight him or not, I'm not sure. But Crawford is also very talented. He just moved up from the junior welterweight division to recently, probably about a year and a half ago, to win the his version of the welterweight title. And so he's a very good fighter, another southpaw like Errol Spence. And it'll be interesting to see what the fallout of this weekend is going to be. I doubt it if we see Mikey Garcia win or lose, going back down to the lightweight. Though a fight with Lomachenko would be worth watching.
So you think he's going to stick around at welterweight then?
I think he will. Depending on how well he feels his body takes to the however long this fight is going to last. I mean, I've heard some fighters where they've done this and they say, well, you know what, this weight was too much. I think it was just too much, and I think I'm just going to go back down. And just a little bit of history. There aren't many fighters, in fact, I can't think of a fighter off the top of my head that has ever done that, where they fought at one division and jumped two divisions to fight the champion and won. The only fighter that I know that's done that was back in the 1930s, and he didn't just jump two divisions to win another title. He actually held three titles: featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight simultaneously. This is before the junior divisions were introduced. For example, today, between featherweight and lightweight, we have junior lightweight. And between lightweight and welterweight, we have junior welterweight. Well, there were no junior weight classes back then. So you're looking at 126 pounds featherweight, 135 pounds, and then 147 pounds welterweight. There were no junior divisions. And this guy jumped featherweight and fought a gentleman by the name of Barney Ross, who back then was probably on the top 50 list of all time, and beat him. And so this guy they didn't just jump two divisions, but he held three titles: featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight simultaneously. Never been done again. That is special, man.
What's your prediction for the fight?
Errol Spence, probably decision.
Decisions.
Yeah, 12-round decision. But I wouldn't be surprised if he stopped him in the 10th round.
I'm going to go for Mikey Garcia in 9.
What Marty's telling me here, I'm going Errol Spence in 2. I'm calling a cold knockout, knock him out of the ring. He might throw him out the ring like Thunder Lips did Rocky in Rocky 3.
Yeah. Oh my God! Didn't he have to take his gloves off to?
Yeah,
we're gonna get into Rocky, dude.
You're gonna go down a deep hole, brother.
I'm gonna go a deep hole.
You know, it's funny that you also were talking about Lomachenko, and I've heard a lot about Lomachenko, but I've never seen the guy box. And I just read about him right now that he's wanting to fight Anthony Crayola, a crayon, I guess. I don't know who this other guy is. But I've been looking forward to seeing this guy, but I think like his fights are never televised, or they are, but it's just hard to get to him. Do you think he's going to hit maybe some mainstream fights?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen sometime this year. And I've watched a lot of Lomachenko's fights on ESPN, so they have been televised.
Sorry.
I've seen him too. Didn't he knock out like 5 guys in a row? And didn't the like number 2 or number 3 contender quit. He had a couple guys quit on their stool in a row, didn't he?
Jeez.
He had 3 guys quit in a row.
Right.
3
That's
fighters
unbelievable.
quit in a row. And these guys were good fighters too. They weren't guys that were ranked, 8th or 9th in their division. These guys were top fighters in their divisions, and they all quit. They just didn't want to come out. He demoralized them. He's a very good fighter. He does lack punching power, but this guy is highly skilled. And so I was kind of hoping him and Mikey Garcia would face off at lightweight before Mikey Garcia took the jump to welterweight. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. It may have had something to do with the promoters. And so there is another guy. I mentioned earlier about young talent. I mentioned David Benavidez, who's fighting on the undercard of the Errol Spence Mikey Garcia fight. There is another highly touted young fighter in the lightweight division that has already gone on record. I think the guy's only 20 years old, but his name is Teofimo Lopez. Very skilled fighter, very skilled. Has one punch knockout power, and there is talk that him and Lomachenko could be on a collision course in the next year and a half. He's 20 years old. I think he's only 20, but there's talk. I mean, they did an interview with him recently, and he was saying, "Well, I'll fight Lomachenko next month." So he's pretty confident in himself. I think it would be a mistake, but whatever Lomachenko was going to do, he probably should do in the next couple of years, because I think he's 31 years old now, and so fighters. Generally speaking, in the lighter weight classes, tend to age more. I'm not sure why, but yeah, I can see Teofimo Lopez taking the lightweight division by storm, and there's going to be no other challenges for him other than Lomachenko, and so that could be a big fight brewing probably in the next year and a half. And so keep that name in your back pocket, Teofimo Lopez.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that guy. Actually, I'm going to look him up and see what his deal is. Yeah, so I'm going to stand by my prediction, Mikey Garcia in 9.
Well, good luck to that. You look like David Benavidez if you do that, because David Benavidez looks like a damn ogre.
All right, guys. Marty, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate your insight.
My pleasure.
We'll definitely do this again on on another fight. And you got anything else, Mike?
Nope, nothing else here.
All right, cool. This is Mike and Pre out.